Good morning to each one of you. My name is Sean Allen. I'm the Director of Finance and Administration for the North Carolina Council of Churches, and I will be your host for this legislative seminar on gun violence prevention. The Council has long been involved in gun violence prevention efforts, but after the Mother Emanuel shooting in June of 2015, we committed ourselves to gathering regularly with a cohort of groups all working on gun violence prevention. A real linchpin of this work is North Carolinians Against Gun Violence. They have worked tirelessly for over 25 years to make the public aware of the true cost of gun violence in our communities and the very real measures we can take to mitigate these unnecessary deaths. We are grateful for their work and delighted to have them here with us today. Our speaker today is Sara Smith with North Carolinians Against Gun Violence. She will tell us many, many things that will be very, very helpful to us. And during that time, you may have some questions that come up. So please feel free to put those in the chat and we will circle back to those later during our Q&A. Sara, welcome. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much, Sean. And thank you to the North Carolina Council of Churches for having us speak about this important issue. I am going to share my screen. Okay, so I'm an organizer with North Carolinians Against Gun Violence. I've been with the organization about 2 years, and I'm honored to be here today and speaking to you about this issue. So the things I'm going to cover today are gun violence in North Carolina, what the data say, concealed carry myths and facts, because there are some bills that are an attempt to dismantle our concealed carry law in North Carolina, other 2021 related gun bills, and what you can do. So I'm starting with data from a report that we released at the end of last year called the Safe North Carolina Report. It includes mostly CDC data during the period that you see on your screen here, 2008 to 2018. We also include county level data with county level injury prevention branch data, gun violence archive, gun violence researchers, FBI data. So I have here a list of how we broke down the data, and I encourage you to look into our report. It's at ncgv.org to read more about the facts and statistics that I'm going to be sharing here today. In 2018, there were 1,416 deaths in North Carolina. That was around 4 gun-related deaths per day, or 1 every 6 hours, roughly. We were 7th by number of firearms deaths in the country, and 24th by rate. And when we talk about rate, we're talking about number of deaths per 100,000 people. And looking at rates allows us to compare states and counties as well of different sizes. So I'm starting with firearms suicide because this is the most common type of gun death in North Carolina. In 2018, there were 873 gun suicide deaths, and these deaths made up 62% of all North Carolina gun deaths. And that was similar for the US as well. The other thing I want to point out about this slide is the increase in gun suicides over time from this low here at 2008 all the way to 2018. The rate increased 12% and the number of gun suicides increased 30%. So when we look at impacted populations by sex and by racial and ethnic group, the steepest increases in the period that we looked at were among males and white people in the state. That's not to say that this is not a problem in other populations. It definitely is a problem, and we need to reach all populations with gun violence prevention messages. the steepest increases during this period. You can see the blue lines are just very problematic during this period. So the next slide is about firearm homicide in the state. And I included a slide, I included a graph that looks at it by rates so that we can compare what's happening in different populations in the state, regardless of size. If we look at rates, which again are the number of deaths per 100,000 people, Black and Native North Carolinians suffer the highest rates. Rates among Hispanic Latinos in this period just declined pretty steeply, which does give us some hope that there is a possibility for a decline. Firearm homicide by numbers, it's very clear that Black North Carolinians suffer far more homicides than any other racial or ethnic group. 67.1% of gun homicides in this year, 2018, and by number, it was 328 gun homicides. So if we look by county, we can see here, the top row is the highest number of gun deaths by deaths overall, suicides, and homicides. The second row on the bottom is rates. So in general, more counties, counties with more people have more gun deaths. It's not universally true. The second highest county in population does not have the second highest number of gun deaths. But if you look overall at the first row of counties, you'll notice that most of them are fairly large counties with metro areas. If we look at firearm death rates, however, which allows us to compare what's happening in counties to each other, regardless of size, you'll notice on the bottom row that these are not counties that we hear nearly as much about. The counties that are much smaller, particularly in the highest firearm suicide rates, these are all Western counties in the mountains or the foothills. 3 of them border Pennsylvania. They're very small counties and really suffering under the weight of firearm suicide. So 2020 data, I definitely wanted to talk about this. However, CDC and North Carolina State Health Department data won't be available until 2022. There are estimates from the Gun Violence Archive, which uses media reports in their calculations of gun deaths. So last year, there was a 1-year increase compared to the year before of 4,000 non-suicide deaths based on Gun Violence Archive data. There were 43,551 firearm deaths overall. And again, these are estimates. 600 mass shootings. And I want to highlight that because there was a perception that because people were at home, mass shootings were not taking place. And Gun Violence Archives defines mass shootings as 4 or more people shot and injured or killed, which is a different definition that you might hear other places. But by that definition, there were 600 mass shootings in the country. Officer involved incidents, which are police shootings, basically. I'm using their terminology here. There were 60 police deaths, but nationally, 1,293. And again, using their terminology here, subject suspect deaths. According to Duke researcher Dr. Philip Cook, last year was the largest 1-year increase in gun violence since record keeping began in the 1930s. It definitely looks to be the most violent year of the 21st century so far, and that looks to be true in North Carolina as well. The estimates for North Carolina for last year are 670 non-suicide gun deaths, up from 511 in 2019, which is a large increase, a 31% increase compared to the year before, just in 1 year. And the reason that Gun Violence Archive does not include suicide deaths are because they use media reports to give more current statistics, and suicide is not reported in the media. So these are the most accurate when we talk about the non-suicide deaths. Those are based on their media reports that they're using to compile their data. We know in a lot of the state, there were increases in homicide. Most of that is firearm homicides. There were definitely increases in Charlotte, Greensboro, and Wilmington. Another thing that we need to consider about last year is the number of people who bought firearms, new firearms, owners especially. We know from media reports and interviews of gun shop owners that a large percentage of people who bought guns did so for the first time last year. So those are people who did not grow up knowing how to clean their gun, how to store their gun, how to shoot their gun. So it's very concerning and something we need to keep watching. Now, based on FBI background check data, 9 out of 10 of the highest gun buying weeks and 8 out of 10 of the highest gun buying days were either in 2020 or 2021, based on FBI background check data. And those are only gun sales nationally. Those are gun sales that are from federally licensed firearm dealers. The Brady law does not, the federal law about background checks does not require background checks on private firearm sales. So we're missing a substantial portion of guns purchased, over the internet or at gun shows, or a private seller from one person to another. Concealed carry myths and facts. So I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about these because there's an attempt in the legislature to dismantle our concealed carry laws, and it's important that we have the facts. So there's a myth that right to carry laws, specifically concealed carry laws, decrease crime. A systematic review looked at studies since 2005, which show that right to carry laws is associated with an increase in crime. One study showed that right to carry laws are associated with a 13 to 15% higher violent crime rate 10 years after these laws are adopted. And shall issue states are associated with a higher total homicide, firearm homicide, and especially handgun homicide rate compared to may issue states. And shall issue means that anyone who shows up at, let's say, a sheriff's office, law enforcement office, whoever is authorized in that state to issue the concealed carry permit, as long as they meet certain legal requirements, that official is required to issue the permit to that person. Now, especially in rural counties, it's possible that the sheriff may know personally the person in front of them and know something about the situation in their home. They may have received domestic violence calls from that home, but if the person standing in front of them meets specific legal requirements, they still have to issue that permit. And North Carolina is a shall issue state on our concealed carry laws. Another myth is that concealed carry is necessary for self-defense. This is the bad guy with the gun, the good guy with the gun beating the bad guy with the gun argument. We know that approximately 2,000 verified cases of defense of gun use are really outnumbered by the 40,000 firearms deaths and tens of thousands more injuries. Dr. Cook, the researcher that I quoted a couple of slides back, was quoted as saying that for every firearm death, there are 4 firearm injuries. So that's really concerning. When you add those injuries to the number of deaths, We're talking about a lot of victims of gun violence here. And these are verified cases of the 2,000 cases of defensive gun use. Firearms are rarely used successfully in self-defense. Individuals are defending themselves with a gun in less than 1% of crimes. The probability of a firearm being used as self-defense in the home is about 7 times less likely than having a firearm used to kill an innocent person, used accidentally in an accidental death. Concealed carry weapons deter mass killings because mass shooters are targeting gun-free zones. The data do not bear that out either. A comprehensive FBI study of 160 active shootings between 2000 and 2013 show that there was 1 active shooter stopped by a concealed carry license holder versus 21 stopped by unarmed civilians. And that's pretty startling. The belief that mass shooters are targeting gun-free zones is misleading. It assumes that mass shooters are thinking rationally, and we know that that is not the case. It's often an impulsive act based on hate, based on emotional grievance or an attachment, not because a certain place does or does not have guns or allow guns to be carried. Of the 111 high fatality rampage shootings, 6 or more victims fatally shot, 84% occurred in gun allowing zones. So I know that a lot of this feels very grim. There are some reasons for hope, both in research and how we can prevent gun violence, as well as legislatively. So I'm going to share a few of those with you now that we were a part of. So last year, you may remember that open carry activists walked down the street in Raleigh, went into a subway openly carrying. They were intimidating, upset a lot of people. So in May, we, along with Guns Down America, Moms Rising, Newtown Action Alliance, had a petition to the CEO saying, please don't allow open carry in your stores. This is making people really uncomfortable. It's not safe. And we think you should not allow this in your restaurants. So in June, the next month, Subway adopted the following policy. For the consideration and comfort of restaurant employees and guests, Subway respectfully requests that guests other than law enforcement refrain from openly displaying firearms inside restaurants, even in states where open carry is permitted. And they cannot outright ban firearms in their restaurants because that would put employees in the position of having to enforce that with people who are carrying a, say, AR-15 or whatever they have. So, but they are respectfully asking people. They're saying, we don't want you in our restaurant intimidating the people who work here and intimidating the people who come to our restaurant. So Holly Springs last year passed an ordinance that bans open carry on town properties. But there were 2 votes about the issue, and between the 2 votes, we, along with other supporters, sent in about 400 comments in favor of the ban, which did pass. Cornelius's ordinance would have banned concealed carry on certain town properties. It was voted down. We, along with other supporters, sent in, or our supporters, in addition to other supporters, sent in 84 comments. They did prohibit open carry without a concealed carry permit on those properties, and they banned concealed and open carry in their arts center. Last year, the Second Amendment Protection Act was a bill in the legislature that would have legalized carrying of concealed firearms at places of worship with associated schools. And it would have allowed EMS personnel to carry when on the job with police. So like during SWAT teams. Governor Cooper vetoed the bill, saying that he was doing so to protect children who go to schools associated with religious places of worship. The veto was sustained in the House. It was a very close vote. with 48 representatives voting to uphold the governor's veto. So this year, I'll start with the same bill that I just mentioned is back with a new number. It would allow concealed carry in places of worship with associated schools and EMS personnel to carry. This is dangerous for kids because we know, based on documentation from many states, that guns in schools can be left behind in restrooms and classrooms and gymnasiums, in places where guns are allowed to be brought to school. We're concerned that despite the bill prohibiting guns during extracurricular activities, it might be hard for people to understand. So, for example, is everyone who is showing up for a Bible study on Wednesday night aware that there's a volleyball game at that same time? This is requiring that worshipers keep track of when school activities are and are not happening. And we just know that this is opening the door for problems. We're very concerned about it. We're also concerned about the EMS portion of the bill. EMS are the helpers. Their responsibility is to care for people during emergencies. They shouldn't have to be worried when they're bending over to help someone if someone is coming up behind them to try and steal their gun. We feel like this is, a recipe for bad things to happen. And we're also worried about the perception, even though the law says that they're to carry in specific situations, that word will get out that EMS is now carrying guns, and expecting the public to know when EMS is and is not carrying. We're concerned about the perception of that, particularly in communities where distrust of armed officers is high. Other dangerous bills, there are 4 permitless carry bills, which would dismantle the concealed carry permit system. They allow people as young as 18 to carry a hidden loaded weapon in public with no training and no background check. There's also an attempt to eliminate North Carolina's pistol purchase permitting system. This law is really important because it's the only law we have in North Carolina that closes the background check loophole left open by federal law. So if you buy a handgun in North Carolina from a private seller, you still have to get a permit requiring that you go through a background check. If we take this away, then that will no longer be there. We will no longer know who is purchasing handguns, and they'll no longer be required to check to make sure that they're that they're not violent people. So we're really concerned about this law. There's also an attempt, again, to arm our teachers. This was tried in 2019. Thankfully, it did not pass. We know, based on polling, that 70% of North Carolina teachers do not want to be armed, teachers and staff, that is. I was at the education rally in Raleigh a few years ago, and I talked to many teachers, school counselors, principals, other staff, and I heard the same thing over and over. We don't want to be armed, and we don't want our colleagues to be armed. Not only are we concerned about the danger that brings into our schools with accidents, we're also concerned about the relationship with our students. Are our students going to be able to trust us knowing that we may be armed? What does that do to our relationship and to the rapport building that I work so hard to do with my students? Law enforcement are trained professionals. School faculty and staff are not. There are some positive pieces of gun legislation. The Safe Firearms Storage Initiative. This is a great piece of bipartisan legislation. It's important because 1 in 3 North Carolina parents owns a gun, and 1 in 4 of those guns are unsecured. We don't know if that number changes with all of the new gun owners from last year, but it's especially important right now more than ever that this is able to pass. It would provide for a safe firearms storage educational campaign in North Carolina and distribute free gun locks. It was all set to pass in 2019 and made it into the budget, but because a number of mini budgets ended up being what ended up passing, it did not make it into those mini budgets. So we're very hopeful that this year that this will pass. The other reason that safe firearms storage is so important is because the number of NC kids who took their own life with a gun doubled from 2008 to 2018. A lot of times parents are thinking about only accidents that may happen, and those are serious, and absolutely that's a very important reason to lock up guns. But we can't forget about people with older children because there is a risk for suicide. Extreme risk protection order law bill is another bill that would allow a family member, healthcare provider, or law enforcement to petition a judge to have someone's weapons temporarily removed if that person has been shown to be a threat to themselves or others. What you may hear online or in the community is that it denies due process. It does not deny due process. The person would go before a judge and be able to defend themselves. And if the judge decided at that time that the person was not a threat to themselves or others, the weapons would be returned. This is used in a lot of other states, including Indiana. So it's not an issue of red state, blue state. It's something that we need to do to protect our population. We also know from research about these laws in other states that for every 10 to 20 risk warrants, extreme risk warrants served, one life is saved. It's specifically one suicide is prevented. Another reason for hope is President Biden's executive actions. They change existing funding across 26 programs and 5 agencies to fund evidence-based proven strategies to reduce gun violence, especially in communities of color. There are very well-researched, tested programs that do prevent gun violence, particularly in urban communities where violence can be high. Violence intervention and prevention programs are used throughout the country. Cure Violence, which is one of the models, which uses violence interrupters who are from the community and work with community members to mediate conflicts before they become violent. They connect people to social services, job training, food assistance if needed, to really address the root problems of gun violence before it ever reaches the point of getting to the gun. And that program is used in many cities around the country and is now being used in cities internationally as well. There are 2 cities in North Carolina that have that program, Durham and Greensboro. Durham's program is being expanded because it was being used due to funding in a small area, was successful in that area, but the gun violence in Durham is a serious problem. And so the funding was expanded for that program, and we hope to see more violence interrupters on the ground very soon. So that's one part of President Biden's executive order, requiring that every part of the gun has a serial number and that background checks are conducted when someone buys a quote ghost gun kit. That has to do with gun tracing to make sure that we know where guns that are manufactured are, so that if it's used in a crime, we have an idea who it belonged to. Regulating and taxing stabilizing braces, which turns a pistol into a short barrel rifle, issuing annual firearms trafficking report, which is really important because we know that firearms trafficking is such a big issue. We can't prevent the problem unless we know the extent of it. And so having better tracking and reporting of trafficking will help us do that. Also making it easier for states to adopt extreme risk protection orders, the legislation I just mentioned. So what can you do? Well, right now we're concerned about the number of negative gun-related bills in the legislature, and we're really looking for people to write letters to the editor. If you haven't done that, they're very short. You write what you're concerned about, why you're concerned, and what you want to see done about it. It's pretty easy to submit. Most papers have an online portal that you can submit to. And they really do make an impact, especially when so many people are still at home. These letters to the editors are very important. Also, the violence intervention and prevention programs like Cure Violence that I just mentioned, let us know if you live in a city or near a hospital that's interested in establishing a violence prevention intervention program. We can connect people with data about the programs, how well they work, and funding mechanisms, especially with President Biden's new funding for these programs. We need more of them in North Carolina. Other ways you can make a difference with us we'd love to have more phone bankers, especially with so many gun bills moving right now. Meetings with lawmakers. We can help you prepare to meet with your lawmaker by phone or eventually when it's safe in person, or whatever skills you bring. I've listed some here, but we're statewide. We work with people all over the state, and we're excited to get to know you. So that's it for my presentation. Thank you so much for allowing me to be here. And I'd be happy to answer questions if I can. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sarah. We did get a couple of questions in the chat box, and I want to encourage you, if you have not yet submitted a question, please go ahead and do so. The first question is related to House Bill 134. And the question is, what is the argument that those who support House Bill 134 use against this clear understanding that it puts people, especially children, at risk?
There's an argument that because guns in churches are already allowed, that churches that have schools associated with them are being discriminated against, when it's just that we want to keep kids safe. And we know that there's a risk anytime guns are allowed on any property that's used as a school. So, that's our position, that the law is bad, or the bill, sorry, is bad.
We hope it won't be a law, right? That's what we hope.
Exactly right. We're working very hard to stop it.
Another question came in wondering if y'all do work alongside Moms Demand Action.
Yeah, we sure do. We have a great group of collaborative partners around the state. The Council of Churches is one of our partners, and Moms Demand Action for sure, Moms Rising, NAACP, that we're really proud to work with in fighting bad bills and advocating for good ones, as well as important programs educating the public about gun violence and safe firearm storage.
Thank you. Please submit more questions as you come up with them. I was curious, you mentioned the VIP advocacy programs. You said we need more of them. How many do we have in the state of North Carolina? Yeah,
so based on the models that we talk about that are really evidence-based, we have we have programs in Durham based on Cure Violence, and Greensboro, and Charlotte, which has just seen their gun violence spiral out of control in the last several years. They are getting their Cure Violence program going, which we're excited about because they really need it there as well. So that program is just getting off the ground. We don't have a hospital-based violence intervention program, which is a different model. It uses the time after a person has been victimized by gun violence, when that person is in the hospital, to provide services and intervention, to provide support to the family and counseling, and provide whatever services, wraparound services the person needs. And the reason that that specific period is chosen is because they're there in the hospital, and it's an opportune time to work with people. And we also know that victims of gun violence, a certain number of them will go on to be perpetrators, and so it's really important to mediate before any kind of retaliation occurs. So we don't have any, but we would love to see a hospital-based program in North Carolina as well.
It sounds like there's a real need for that, really, truly. Here's a question, and this was going to be one of my questions. Leona had mentioned in the chat how grateful she was for these facts, these numbers. This is such a passionate issue on both sides of the argument. And so one of the questions is, are your slides available on the NCGV website?
They're not on our website, but what is on our website is the Safe North Carolina report, which has a lot of the North Carolina-based data that I went over. It's a tab that just is called Safe North Carolina, or Safe NC 2020, I think. So you could definitely go to that website, and a lot of the data that I presented is in there.
That's helpful. I'm sure those statistics will be helpful as people want to talk with their friends and family about this issue. Next question is, have you begun conversations with more conservative family and friends who believe they can keep their family and communities safer with a gun?
Yeah, we're not opposed to gun ownership. And, we have gun owners on our board. We feel like that's an important voice. I'm not sure if the person was asking if we personally have done that. But I mean, I have not had the need in my own family to have those conversations. My immediate family does not own guns. My husband did grow up around guns and knowing how to care for them safely. And, members of his family do hunt, and, as long as it's being done safely and stored safely so that no one can get to it that shouldn't have it. Firearm theft is a huge part of firearms trafficking. So leaving a gun unlocked in a nightstand is just a very dangerous thing to do. The same with leaving guns in cars unlocked. Gun traffickers are known to target cars that have gun bumper stickers, NRA, or any paraphernalia like that on the cars. So, we do hear the concern about needing to be ready with your firearms to defend yourself. The risk of something bad happening from use of that gun is much, much higher. There was something else I was going to say about that. It might come to me. If it does, I'll mention it. Sorry.
Well, thank you.
Does that help answer the question? Oh, one more, I remember now. For people who do want to get at their firearms quickly, if there's a need, they do make locked boxes that use a fingerprint, so that in the event of an emergency, you just put your fingerprint on the biometric piece of the gun lock, you open it, and you can get to it quickly.
Thank you. My next question is, I guess in y'all's efforts to fight legislation, do the statistics seem to have any impact on the votes of the General Assembly, or do they react to the demands of their rural constituents?
I think it depends on the lawmaker. what has the most impact is hearing from constituents, by far. So, and it's not just one party or the other. Both parties, people from both parties have voted for bad policy. So we work with a lot of supporters, specifically in areas that have moderate lawmakers, either moderate Democrat or moderate Republican. We work a lot in those places because we know that lawmakers do want to keep people safe, and will a lot of lawmakers are reasonable and will reject the worst of the gun legislation. We're concerned about the pistol purchase permit repeal because in the past, sheriffs sided with the gun violence prevention side, and this year changed their mind, and a lot of lawmakers listened to sheriffs about gun related issues. So if you're interested in being active on that, I will put my email in the chat. You can also sign up on our website, ncgv.org, and you'll get action alerts about when bills are moving. We're tracking things very closely.
Well, and this might be piggybacking on what you were starting to talk about. What is the most impactful thing that you think citizens can do to help stop gun violence and encourage gun reform?
Yeah. So one is be involved in policy reform. There are some good bills that come up, like the Safe Storage campaign, that we really hope will pass. Defending or fighting the bad bills as well. We need people to be at city council meetings when cities meet about their budgets, and these programs, the violence prevention programs, are being discussed because they do cost, and cities are strapped, especially with budgets being cut with COVID. So we know that it's hard in a city to invest, but it's really important to invest in these programs. I think also storing firearms safely if you have them, and encouraging family members to do the same is really important for the reasons I mentioned. For the reason if someone in your home shouldn't have access to them, as well as the risk of them being stolen and then trafficked and used in crimes.
Thank you. This next question is about gun manufacturers, and do they support the campaigns of some of our state legislatures?
I do not know directly. I mean, I know that that some lawmakers have, well, I don't know the extent of gun manufacturers. I know, there are lawmakers nationally and everything that have received money from the NRA. So we know that it's an issue. I don't know about specific manufacturers giving funding to specific lawmakers. It's a great question. We are concerned about certainly the influence of the NRA on lawmakers, which is another reason that we all need to raise our voices. Our side does not have as much funding, but we can use our voices to really advocate against the bad laws that are attempting to be passed in the legislature.
And I think it is, as has been mentioned in the chat, honesty, transparency, these would be helpful things, right? The more of it, the better, especially in terms of where the support is going to our legislators. There's a question about the extreme risk protection order. Is there any assistance for the petitioning process? I guess assuming it would become law.
Right. By assistance, can you tell me in the chat if you mean like by the person who is petitioning the judge? Like, how would that process go?
I don't know if that's been responded to. Maybe along those lines, maybe the person who is trying to file the petition, pro se petitioning.
Yeah, I'm honestly not sure about how that works, and every state has, their laws are slightly different. So that's a really good question. I apologize that I don't have more information on that.
Right. Next question. With all of the recent gun violence caused by police officers during an encounter, is your organization doing any work with police organizations to lessen those tragedies?
We are not working with police directly. One of our board members is chair of a chapter of the NAACP in North Carolina, a local chapter who has reached out to police about those issues. We're concerned about the police shooting in Elizabeth City and trying to raise awareness about it, but we haven't specifically worked with police on that issue.
This is a follow-up to that. Are there partner organizations that you could direct people to that are doing that work that people could support?
Nationally, there's a great organization called Community Justice Action Fund, CJAF, and they're also working to get violence intervention and prevention programs passed. They might be doing some of that work. I'm not aware of an organization in the state that is doing that. Perhaps NAACP. I know that, like I said, our board member, who's also chair of a chapter of the NAACP, has been in touch with the local NAACP in the area and is providing whatever support that they can. And we're happy to support however we can as well.
Thank you. This question is asks, what outreach is possible and also happening with congregations in North Carolina? And then it specifies in our respective denominations and judicatories.
Yeah, so prior to quarantine, we definitely used to give presentations at churches or faith groups of many different denominations. That work has stopped in quarantine. We've just started doing presentations again. We spent a lot of last year fighting some bad bills in the legislature, as well as there were a number of counties on trying to become quote unquote Second Amendment sanctuary counties, saying that the laws didn't apply there. So we spent time on that, as well as getting out the vote. So we hope to get back to being able to do presentations either on Zoom or in person. Hopefully, eventually, it's so much more, it can be impactful in person, and I can hand out materials, and I really like being in person. But until then, we'll keep doing presentations on Zoom.
So it sounds like if someone has an interest in having that either a Zoom presentation or when in-person ones are available to be done, that they could reach out to NCGV and set that up for their church.
Yeah, that would be great. We would love that. And I do travel statewide. So I'm happy to come to whomever in the state.
So here's a question. Do you have an effort to specifically convince NRA members to try to influence the NRA to be more responsible in its behavior and the policies it supports and openly criticizes?
No, that's not really in the scope of our work. When I table at events, when it is safe, I definitely talk to people who are NRA members. And one way that we can come together is around safe storage. We provide free gun locks at most of our events. And so when people come to pick up a gun lock, or if they come because they see our sign and are opposed and want to talk to us about it, the safe storage is a thing that we can come together on for a lot of people who think that they're opposed to everything that we stand for. There are also a lot of myths around guns and gun violence, and having a one-on-one conversation in the community is really a chance to connect and dispel some of those myths. But are we specifically doing outreach to, I apologize that my alarm keeps going off. Are we specifically trying to do a lot of outreach to NRA members? We're not doing that.
I thank you for that answer. That would be a tall order, I think, in some regards, kind of going into the belly of the beast, so to speak. I do want to point out in the chat that if there are questions or engagement with regarding police violence, to consider looking into the local Black Lives Matter chapters and some of their listed partner organizations. And we do want to point out that our executive director, Jennifer, is at an event today for this afternoon. We'll be at an event in Elizabeth City with other pastors to declare a moral emergency. So we want to keep in our prayers Andrew Brown Jr.'s family, and certainly the so many other families who've been impacted by gun violence, not just at the hands of police, but even at the hands of guns in their own home. I don't see any more questions, but certainly, excuse me, would direct you, if you have any other questions, to feel free to email Sarah. Sarah, thank you so much for your time today and for the good work that you and others are doing through North Carolinians Against Gun Violence. This is important work. It is sacred work to bring about a peaceable kingdom here on earth. Thank you so much for having me. And so we will close our time together with a litany. I will speak it. You can stay on mute, but thank you for your time together. I hope that you have found this rewarding and inspiring and feel called to act. God of peace, you've shown yourself to us as one who demonstrated that what true power looks like by refusing to use violence. We're willing to follow your way of peace. God of justice, you have invited us into peacemaking work by showing us that justice is the first ingredient. We are willing to work for your way of justice. God of righteousness, you have provided the means for all creation to flourish when we walk your righteous path. We are willing to be your righteous people. Thank you for joining us. Go with God's peace.